Welcome to another episode of Clean Talk. I'm your host, Brad Whitchurch. We are coming to you live from beautiful, sunny downtown Orlando, Florida, the Seal Shield Studios. And I'm very excited today for our guest, Christine Gallo. Christine, thank you so much for joining the show. Christine is the founder and CEO of Gallo Medical. Christine, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here today.
So first of all, Brad, thanks for having me. Appreciate being here and chatting with you today. I am the CEO of Gallo Medical Company, and we are a medical equipment supplier. And specifically, we've been working diligently this past year and a half to help with the COVID and the pandemic. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I think before we get started, if we could just thank all of the hospital workers and those that have been tirelessly working throughout this past year and a half. It's important that we recognize them, the frontline responders, and all of those that have been supporting all of us around the country. I think it's important to take that second and do that. But thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for making that note as well. And I know we're here to talk about healthcare heroes. And really, the platform, as you know, is all about infection prevention. We both share a passion for infection prevention and the importance of infection control in healthcare and in the general community. And that's why I'm excited to have you on the show. Christine, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you became so involved in this cause and what you do with Gallo Medical to help support infection control efforts.
So I, in 2014, spent 6 weeks in an ICU unit with my husband who had cancer. And one of the things that we were faced with during that time was Legionnaire's disease, staph infection from the port, hospital-acquired pneumonia, and an allergic reaction to an antibiotic, which was being used to fight the infections. And, I saw a lot. Obviously, I was in the ICU. My mother was in the ICU with me at that time, and we were round the clock taking care of him. And, I learned a lot, and I saw a lot, and I saw a lot of deficiencies. Well, whether it's the facility's fault or not, I was taking notes. I had a diary, and, it just became something that was really sort of bothering me. Why do we do this? And why do we do that? I ironically owned my own company at the time, and then I've just sort of evolved into infection prevention. And, I'm very passionate about it, as you know, and I just have been able to align myself with amazing manufacturers such as Seal Shield to make an impact in that space, in that department of the hospital. And then, of course, COVID comes along, and that's just sort of magnified my work and the delivery of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. And I'm sure we'll talk about today. So that's really how I got here. And, over the past 18 months have been diligently, my team, my staff, supporting the healthcare market, long-term care, and even airports, shopping malls, and beyond. So again, thanks for having me. And I am excited to sort of delve in a little bit into some of the issues that you and I both have in common that we see need to be addressed.
Well, again, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for sharing your story with us. Many of us who are passionate about infection prevention have very personal, real-world stories, and it's worth mentioning the statistics that we're all familiar with. As many as 100,000 people die every year in this country from an infection they get in a U.S. hospital, and really less talked about even is that as many as 800,000 people are left permanently disabled as a result of an infection they got in a hospital. And we have a personal story here at Seal Shield as well. One of our former board members and an investor in Seal Shield contracted a hospital-acquired infection that left him blind. And he lost a vocal cord and a toe and a finger. And, a lot of people just aren't familiar with the real issue that's happening day to day and the struggle that our healthcare heroes have to deal with to try and protect their patients as well as themselves from these hospital-acquired infections. You mentioned spending time in the ICU, and we started talking about healthcare heroes. To my mind, there's almost no greater hero than the folks that are working in the ICU. But with so much going on and so many people coming in with different pathogens, it's really just a prime place for infections to thrive. and the challenges that our healthcare workers are facing as a result of these infections is significant. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. Some of the best practices or tools or things that hospitals can do to try and improve their infection rates and make a meaningful and measurable impact, as we like to say. So maybe you can share with us your thoughts, Christine, being in the industry, on how you've seen things change in terms of hospital-acquired infections, or how infection prevention is handled prior to COVID versus now with the greater awareness around COVID. Have you seen any changes you'd like to share with our audience?
So I think we're starting to create a portfolio of products that we can attack these issues within these facilities. You know, we have certain bedding and linens that we're looking at now. We're looking at copper. We're looking at, and when I say copper, copper has the ability to have antimicrobial functions. We're looking at UV significantly. We're looking at hand washing tracking systems. All of those things would have been great to have had in place prior to COVID, because it probably would have helped control. I don't think the common person understands the challenges that were so significant prior to COVID, and then you throw that on the plate, and they're a mess, right? I mean, we didn't know how to respond to such a significant issue in our environment where we're trying, remember, to get people better. And, you know, I think it's important to understand those challenges, along with COVID, have just created, you know, a very difficult scenario. And so as we move forward, we're trying to find, what you said, tools. I call it a toolkit. What's in your toolkit? And what are you using to move forward in this scenario? And what are we going to implement and standardize to address our population of sick people within hospitals and long-term care?
Well, yes. So we need to come up with standards, and we need to be able to evaluate the innovation that's happening and kind of filter out what's effective and what isn't, and develop standards around that. I'm interested in some of the technology you mentioned. You talked about copper. Copper has been validated to have antimicrobial properties. Now, you mentioned the bed sheets. I know that in a hospital setting, and a lot of our viewers might not be aware of this, but if the patient before you had C. diff, you're 85% more likely to contract C. diff. I bring this up because you mentioned the bed sheets and you mentioned copper in the same breath. Are these copper sheets you're looking at, or what are you seeing that can address the inpatient room cross-contamination infection problem?
Yep. So we're looking at certain pillows, certain linens. Then we're also looking at the EVS checklist when they move out. When you change a room, we're looking at how do we address, how are we sanitizing that room, which gets into the UV equipment, which is the autonomous robots that we represent. So you put the bedding with the autonomous robot, and then we're looking at addressing your staff, right? Are your staff doing the things they should be doing that are just, you know, almost common sense? Hand washing tracking. The tracking then gives reporting and data, which can then tie to your leapfrog scores. So these are all products that were being developed pre-COVID. It's just now we're addressing it. You know, are we post-COVID? No, we're still in it. So it's hard in the throes of it. And so when you look at these products, you look at Seal Shield, you look at the you look at keys and phones and sanitizing them, and you look at the floors and how are we sanitizing the floors, and are we standing on UV units to disinfect the bottom of your feet, which, how do pathogens travel in? Through your feet. We're looking at upper air solutions. Are we disinfecting our air, return and in? Not just, you know, we always want to like make it an easy answer, but it has to be the entire portfolio. And I think if you look at the facilities and the organizations that are approaching it from a 360 view, they're the ones that we're seeing success rates in their numbers. And
so important. Yeah.
And
so
that's the trend that we need to follow. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way we talk about it is the multiple vectors of cross-contamination, right? And you want to break that chain of infection, but it's not just about focusing on one area. You know, if you the UV robots are probably not enough alone. Washable keyboards and mice are not enough alone. But if you have a suite of solutions You may not be able to solve the problem, but you can create a meaningful, measurable impact if you're addressing the low-hanging fruit, the primary vectors of cross-contamination. And so I think you're on the right track. A holistic 360-degree solution is what it's going to take to really make a meaningful, measurable impact.
But I think what we're also trying to do, Brad, is we're trying to create environments so that these patients can get better. If they can, they will, right? And then we're also trying to create environments where it's safe for their loved ones to enter to be with them. I mean, do we realize the scenario that we created over the past year where loved ones are passing away without their family members? We can do better. I'm sure of it. And how we do better is by implementing products and services and protocols and standardization that we're addressing the needs, because the need is not just clinical in a hospital, but it's also emotional, not just emotional for the patient, but emotional for the families and the staff. And, you know, we're having such staffing issues in healthcare. Well, of course we are. Look at the challenges. I mean, you can't do this day in and day out, but if we create environments that they feel safe and healthy and that we're going above and beyond, not just doing the bare minimum, but doing what we really need to do and what we probably always should have done, that's how we approach what we're facing right now. And then what we're going to see beyond the other variants. And like I was saying, there's other pathogens besides COVID that we're facing right now. And there are new ones every day and they're deadly. So we can do better.
That's right. From our perspective, we know that COVID has brought attention to this issue, but it really dates back to the beginning of recorded time. I think the first evidence of tuberculosis was carved in an Egyptian tomb. People forget about the Black Death, the White Death, and as recent as the Spanish flu, which was in the 20th century. So these pandemics have been happening throughout history. It's inevitable that they will continue to happen and happen again. And there's really no excuse for us being caught off guard. And now that there is the greater awareness around COVID, I feel like at least we have an opportunity to have a voice and people hear what you're saying and are open to the idea of making investment in these kind of solutions. Has that been your experience? Are you seeing an increased awareness or willingness to look at advanced or innovative infection control solutions today in the COVID world?
So I think it's by industry. And if I could just address, we put UV equipment in a couple of different airports around the country. And if an airport can implement technology to fight infection prevention, then our healthcare and other verticals can as well, right? I think that long-term care has really embraced new technology. And I think we're finding that the federal funding is starting to come to address helping them. But also, if we help them, we can't just give them money. We have to see follow through on protocol process, standardization, compliance. Let's help them with what they choose to make sure it works, correct? And let's start to track and trend numbers and data in, data out, so we can see where we're at. We always knew the number for HAI and what the return was, but did we know the kind of fiscal money that we were putting forward to solve those problems? Are we tracking and trending that?
Well, I think it's a crucial topic, and especially with additional funding coming out as a result of COVID. And I want to come back to that, but I want to touch on something you mentioned. You talked about the airports. And so now, because of COVID, right, we're seeing a focus in areas outside the hospital. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've done in the airports and maybe other commercial or public environments outside of healthcare?
So pre-COVID, we were just hospitals. That's it, in infection prevention. And then we last summer started working with an airport, and now we have a few airports that have implemented UV. And so interesting, right? We also did some work during the Super Bowl where we disinfected some of the VIP areas and the players areas and the practice areas, which that's interesting. I've been approached by different sports teams that we're talking to look at their arenas and where people gather in great masses, right? We're also long-term care, as I mentioned before, that was not really a strong focus. Now it's one of our strongest focuses. And in fact, it's where we implemented the first full suite of portfolios that we offer was in a skilled nursing facility. Who would have thought, right? It was always that they didn't have the money. Well, they had to find the money because they had to address the issue of their COVID patients. And that's one of, I mean, I don't want to say one of the great things, but one of the great things about what's happened over the past year and a half is that we now get in the door to help these industries that are struggling to keep people alive. That's what they're doing. They're struggling to keep people alive. And we're able to offer some products that can sort of make not just the patients feel comfortable, but like I said, the families and the staff. And then that has transcended, like you said, into airports, arenas, shopping malls, restaurants. I had a very large restaurant chain that just reached out to me and they'd like to put UV in all of their high traffic areas. How interesting, right?
I think
Because
it's very interesting, right? Because, and there's a couple of things going on here in the commercial world, right? They want to make sure that not only their employees are safe and that they feel safe and that they're comfortable coming into work, but that their customers, their patrons also feel safe enough to travel at the airport or go to the Super Bowl or go out to the restaurant. And so it's an interesting double-edged sword that you're implementing solutions that not only to solve the problem, but to make people feel comfortable that the problem is being addressed in a satisfactory way. And I think that's a big change since COVID in areas outside of healthcare. Would you agree?
Yes, and if they are sick and they have to go into a hospital or a long-term care community, that they're in an environment that is disinfected to a level that they're not going to acquire anything additional, that they're going to be safe. And I think that's really the message that's come out over this past year and a half, for sure.
And you also mentioned long-term care, and that's a complicated situation because you're dealing with immunocompromised patients who are receiving long-term care. There is some funding coming through from the government for long-term care. Is that something you can tell us a little bit about?
Slow. It's slow. Maybe they'll watch this podcast and they'll call me. But I mean, it's slow and it's so needed. But one thing, we can give them money, but are we giving them the tools to know what to do with that money? Right? Are we making sure what they choose is the right thing? Do we have any kind of guidelines around that? We need to be thinking about that as we evolve and as we transcend out of this next, because it's not over. It's actually, I was talking to a hospital today and they were telling me some stories and I thought, oh my God, and we're trying to find ways to meet with them outside of the hospital, in the parking lot, in hotels. I just met with a health system in a hotel because they didn't feel it was safe for us to come in. And so, we're trying to be creative in how we help them, not just that way, but also financially, grants, donations, raising money. We had what raised for 2 robots for a cancer center. And we did that because they needed it. And so, what creates a business is a need. And that's where we're at as we climb out of all of this chaos. Is the need is great. And we need to understand how to identify it, how to overcome the issues like financial, and move forward. That's the most important thing we can do right now, and get them the right products.
The right products and the funding, and it's not necessarily simple, right? So even if you have the money, what's the right decision to make? How do you determine what the best suite of solutions is? There's new innovation all the time. Has it been validated? Has it not been validated? And that's where you mentioned standards. I think so important to develop standards that we can all agree on. Our guest last week was Dr. Diane Poster with NIST, and they set the standards and technology for the U.S. government in public-private partnership. And it couldn't be more crucial than now to have standards we can all agree on so that it isn't complicated. Because as you mentioned, getting the money is only the first step. And it seems intuitive, but how do you make sure that that money is being allocated and used efficiently, and that the right solutions are put in place to get the most meaningful impact?
So I always tell people they can call me and I'll talk them through what they're looking at. I just recently went into a facility and I tested their UV equipment to see if it was getting to the level that it needed to get to kill pathogens, and it wasn't. So I'm like, okay, so you guys are using this stuff every day. You're making everybody think this is that you've implemented, but it's not working. So I think that's where, we separate ourselves and my team. We don't just talk about what we have, but we want to see what you have. And then we want to kind of plug in where you need. But I think I would challenge all of us to do that as we move forward. Let's make sure that we're ethical, that we're promoting products that really work, that we've tested them, that we have data to back them. What about your reporting capabilities? All of those little parts and pieces are important, and that's what will give us credibility moving forward. Because let's not just say we're doing it, let's really do it.
All right. I think that's so important, because we talked about, we want people to feel safer and feel better about their environment, but we don't want them to have a false sense of confidence, right? That we need to validate that these solutions are actually working, that we're not just marketing to make people feel safer if they're really not.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see compliance come out. It's been slow because we're just sort of wishy-washy. And hasn't it all been kind of wishy-washy? Do this, don't do that, do this. But in our industry, you and I, we can do a great job, and we are doing a great job. And we are providing some of the best products on the market. We're not just providing, but we're supporting them. We're finding ways to raise money for them. We're writing their grants for them. We're holding their hand for them. And I'm proud of the work that we do. I'm proud of the work that you've done. I think it's important that we keep that credibility factor going. Having podcasts like this, supporting our industry and our healthcare workers, and getting the information that they need so that they can make the best decisions to once again create healthy environments.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And that is why we created this podcast. It's to be an agnostic platform, to help share best practices, to help increase the awareness around cross-contamination infections. And so I love having someone like you on the show that's as passionate about this as we are. And, we've talked about the funding, the money's coming slow, but there is money coming. On the private side, through private capital, we've seen a lot on our end. So in the past, and you and I have talked about this, historically, there really has not been an infection control investment category. Private equity firms, venture capital firms, they're investing in pharma, they're investing in medical devices, they're investing in healthcare IT. There is literally not an infection control category. And it's only now, as a result of the awareness created by COVID, that we're seeing some of these capital markets in the private sector coming forward with interest on, how can we promote innovative solutions? How can we help make people safer and feel better, and reduce the cost of hospitals as a result, right?
Yeah, and I think I saw just a few weeks ago, Newsweek did an article about the top 20 products post-COVID. Helping, climate. And so I think the consumers are starting to educate themselves, even in their home, right? And interestingly enough, I've said it 1,000 times, everything is a hospital now. Our car, our airport, our doctor's office, everything. We're treating it as though it needs to be sterile. Our schools, look at what we're doing in schools, amazing work in schools. Think about kids, how sick we're creating environments for them to stay healthy in the locker room, for the football teams, for the sports teams. So I think it's kind of exciting in a way, because it's an industry that's just going to grow and grow. Once again, with products that we know are relevant and really working. That's what the main focus has to be. And then the funding, I think the funding is going to come. I think we're going to start to address it. We're going to shift a little bit. I think we're going to see compliance from the federal government and from Joint Commission, and I think, again, we're still in the middle of it. We're deep in the middle of COVID, and as we go into 2022, hopefully we start to identify some best practices, and we implement them, and then they become standardized, and then we just continue to build on what we've already accomplished.
Well, you mentioned earlier on a lot of the technologies that address these multiple vectors we're talking about. Is there one particular type of technology, whether it's UVC, you mentioned antimicrobial copper, is there, I know it's a multi-vector problem, but is there something that you say, hey, this is the low-hanging fruit, this is always my first recommendation, we want a 360-degree view, but this is a critical piece? Is there something you feel passionate about in terms of technology that helps with this problem?
Well, I always like technology that is not chemical based. So I love UV. I love UV in all aspects of the word. And I first became affiliated with UV because I had a rental property in Florida and I got mold in my air conditioning system. And we put a UV light in the air conditioning system and the mold went away. This was in 2004.
Right.
Okay. That was my first experience. And then now it's like, oh my gosh. So we can not only approach mold, but all the other MRSA, C. diff, staph with UV. But you have to implement a program that's really going to make it result in efficiencies and good numbers. And so my challenge is, okay, we know the technology is there, but we need to implement the program. How often are we doing it? Are we using it in the right places at the right time? How are we documenting it? And so, Seal Shield, UVC cleaning systems, UVD robots, a plethora of other manufacturers, they have great products. We just need to make sure we're using them to the level that will produce the best outcome. And so it's about discipline. We're learning discipline through COVID. I mean, do you wash your hands more? I know I do. I'm always right. Are we using hand sanitizer? So all of these things with that technology are what create the better environments.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And UV has been around for a long time, but as a result of COVID, much more awareness on the capabilities of UV and some of the challenges with UV that you already mentioned. How do you know it's working, right? Making sure that you have a solution that is not only technically sound, but is also operating as it was intended. You've mentioned several times air quality, and I think this is super important. I have a little bit of history in dealing in air quality in healthcare. Healthcare systems are using massive air systems that rely on HEPA filtration and positive pressure. What else can healthcare systems be looking at in terms of air quality? What are you promoting or recommending in that area?
So what's interesting about UV does help promote better air quality. It kills the pathogens in the air. It's not just about the surfaces, but about the air and what's going on and floating around. And, we have different products we put in the ceiling, we put in the floor, we put on the wall. It's a robotic that travels around and we get, good disinfection points. We implement, we have a pattern that we use when we do it. And so I think, you can have the upper air solutions like bipolar ionization or those things, and that's great, but that's just one on the list. And then we go to the surfaces, we go to the bedding, to the pillows, to the sheets, to the blankets, to the curtains. So all of that impacts the air because the pathogens come from where they sit and fall and then they move, right? So once again, the air is disinfected through all of those technologies coming together, not just one.
Now, you mentioned, I'd asked you before, can you clarify when you talk about the disinfection protocols around the linens, are you promoting UV for that solution as well? Or I know you'd mentioned copper in the same breath. I know that there's copper sheeting, and are you working with any of those antimicrobial solutions in the linens, or are you advocating a UVC disinfection protocol for those for the linens and for the sleeping environment?
So we are about to launch a bedding and a pillow and bedding line, and that will be coming out in the next few weeks. And you can go to gallomedicalcompany.com. And then we are also disinfecting the bedding with our UV autonomous robots, UVD robots. So yes, so those, and then the hand washing application, we're launching that as well. And so all of those three technologies together are how we're going to approach the patient room. Because realize pre-COVID, we were looking at the ORs, we were looking at the lobbies, at the bathrooms, but now we've shifted our focus to the ICU, step-down units, the general population for patients, even the doctor's offices. And so we're using all of those products together unanimously.
Outstanding. 360-degree protection. Well, let me put you a little bit on the spot here, Christine. Optimist or pessimist, what do you see for the future of infection control? Are things going to get better?
Oh, I think they've already gotten better. I think us talking about it here today is getting better. You know, I think us sitting down yesterday and talking was it getting better. I think us finding ways to meet the needs of these healthcare facilities in their parking lots, alternative places is getting better. I think that we are finding financial ways to assist. I think we're finding every day I see a new product coming out, and we're creating organizations that are going to support each other. I think where we could really get better is with each other, right? Just the common people. You know, let's just find a way to maybe just overcome how difficult all of this has been and really feel positive about the direction that we can go instead of where we didn't go, and sort of be heroes to each other and support each other through this very difficult time. I think we've almost forgotten that COVID is people getting sick, right? And dying all the time, every week, every day, in every state, in every county, no matter who their governor is. You know, we are not surviving this illness. And sure, we can talk about how it got here and when it got here, but we really should be helping each other and have a servant's heart to support each other in our communities, in our hospitals. They need it. We need it. And just try to create a more positive environment where we're talking about what we are doing and how can we help each other, and find heroes in each other, in our little towns, in our little churches, and our families. Because I can tell you, we all know somebody, and it shouldn't have to touch you in your immediate family. It's touching all of us with our friends and our families and our loved ones. And I think it's time for us to have better dialogue and better speech about what we're going through and be more supportive. That's my opinion.
Well, I appreciate you being a healthcare hero, and there are so many healthcare heroes, sung and unsung. We've talked about the need for a healthcare hero in infection control on a global level or on a macro level. Where's that person going to come from? Who's that going to be?
I think it's us in our communities. You know, you, myself. I think that we have to find ways to support those that are sick, just like we support people with cancer, right? I see GoFundMe's all the time. There's families that are suffering from this disease. You know, I go to this restaurant in Tampa, and the waiter, I think he's had 6 family members pass away from COVID. You know, and we often want to say, well, it was their immune system, or they weren't vaccinated, or they didn't want, you know, we have to stop focusing on all these little details and focus on the fact that we have sick people. We have hospitals, the ICU rooms are maxed. We just turned a labor and delivery ward into a COVID overflow in South Florida. You know, this is the facts. This is not BS. It's the truth. And we need to start addressing it and being there for each other, even if it hasn't affected you or you don't believe in it. We still can speak nicer and kinder to one another, and maybe have fundraisers to support families or GoFundMe's. You know, it's just, and then there's the long-term effects of COVID that we haven't even seen yet, because we're not long-term yet. And just really be kinder and have more empathy towards it, the fact that people are sick. Like, I don't understand the difficult dialogue that our people are having. I understand some of the financial ramifications that we've seen personally. It's not been easy, but let's always remember it's because people got sick. That's the
Absolutely.
truth. Mhm.
Well, Christine, we appreciate you coming on Clean Talk and speaking the truth, and appreciate you being a healthcare hero. Our guest today has been Christine Gallo. Christine, if people want to learn more, where should they go? What should they do?
So our new products will be coming out on gallomedicalcompany.com. We're releasing some new ones over the next few weeks, some bedding, some pillows, some hand washing tracking, some new UV equipment. But the most important thing for myself and my team is if you need help and you're not sure what to do, you can call us and one of us will help you. I have a great team. We're all super passionate about what we do. We all have a story, and we're all here to really just help these communities, restaurants, businesses get through the next few months or the next few years any way that we can.
Well,
So thank you for
Christine,
having me.
yes, well, thank you for being on the show. We really appreciate everything you're doing in infection control. Christine Gallo has been our guest today. Please be sure to join us next week and every week, Wednesday at 3 p.m. Next week, our guest will be Dr. Chad Roy from the University of Tulane Medical Center, and it will be all things about the science of masks. There may be a few surprises there for you. Be sure to tune in then. My name is Brad Whitchurch. You've been watching Clean Talk. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, remember, keep it clean.